I know it's late in the day, but me and James are going to try to keep your attention. We have some exciting things to talk about. So welcome to Remotely Invoking ArcGIS. My name is Brent Pierce. I'm a prog engineer on the apps team. And James Tedrick is also a product engineer. Are you a product engineer?
Manager. Right?
Product manager. Oh, intimidated now.
Code.
Yeah, so he's a product manager. You typically work on Survey 123 and Survey 123? Cool. So we've both been doing a lot of work with integrating the apps we're working with the other apps that we create, as well as putting extensibility points so you guys can integrate your apps with ours. So let's get started. So the key technology we use for app integration is called what we call a URL scheme. And simply put, really, a URL scheme is really just a method of passing state between different applications. And this is actually in pretty common use on iOS and the Android platform today. And just, does anyone know that they've used the URL scheme before? Do people familiar with this technology? Definitely the guy in the back, the really handsome guy in the back, has used URL schemes before. And yeah, I made his face bright red. That's what you get, Craig. He's on my team, and he's just sticking around because he wants to answer some questions about Workforce. So think about your toughest integration question with Workforce and send it to him, because he's worked a lot on the Workforce app and the integrations. But really, the integrations also, you might have used them without even knowing, actually. So the telephone app on iOS, that uses the TEL integration scheme. That's Apple's integration, a URL scheme. So when you tap that a little telephone icon, it actually calls out to the phone app, Apple's phone app, and passes the telephone number as an argument of that URL scheme. And in many different ways, that's kind of what we're doing with our apps as well. So this is really deep linking, which is a pretty hot topic now today with mobile apps. And it's just a way to link into a specific deeper state within your app, whether it's a location of your app or pass your app different arguments via a certain scheme. Here we're using a URL scheme. And the methodology really varies by iOS, Android, BlackBerry, if you guys remember those, or Windows. They all have their own kind of implementation of this. But it all comes down to, passing state between applications and have applications being able to talk to one another. So at Esri, we've really standardized on the more iOS style of URL schemes. And iOS was kind of the first platform to figure this out in some kind of consistent way. So when we were building this up a couple years ago, we decided to standardize on that style. And that's what we'll be talking about today a little bit. Nice thing is that a URL scheme works across all platforms. So if you can write one URL, and I'll show you some examples of this, and host it, well, it works for our Android version of that app. And it also works for our iOS version. And if we have a Windows version, it works for that as well. So you really only have to write one scheme with one argument, one set of arguments, and that works independent of the users and which platform they're actually using your app on. So it's kind of nice cross-platform solution. So the URL scheme structure is pretty simple. The first thing it has is a scheme, and the second thing are app-specific arguments or data after that scheme. So you see here, your scheme usually just has your app's name, and then followed by, after the question mark, are all the arguments, followed by an equals and then a value. And they're usually separated by, it depends on the scheme, but sometimes it's separated by an ampersand. And then typically spaces are encoded with either a plus or a percent encoding mechanism. So it really depends. For us, we use the plus encoding mechanism, and we just throw a bunch of arguments after the question mark. And then the first part of it is the scheme, and that really identifies the app. So our apps register to handle a specific scheme, and then we parse out all the arguments and do specific things. So, below that simple example, you see a more sophisticated example of the Navigator URL scheme, and it has a bunch of different stops in it, which you can pass to the app and tell it to do a route and actually start navigating on that route. So in iOS, now how many of you are developing on the iOS platform? Just a quick show of hands. And the person that just came in the door, are you in iOS? Android? No. Just trying to run away very quickly. It's like, oh, wrong session. So the iOS, the mechanism you'd use to configure your app to support a URL scheme is really just, you'd go into the plist and then just register your scheme within the plist. It's really simple. So once you've registered that in the plist, well, you have to actually handle that scheme itself. And typically the best place to handle it is in the did finish launching with options implementation. So you'd override that stock implementation within your app, and then of course there you would handle your app being launched via that URL scheme that you registered for, and then you'd parse out all the arguments and do something specific. So that's kind of a launching point for you within an iOS application. Now Android's slightly different, and this is probably the last show of hands questions, but how about Android developers out there? Craig? No? No Android development? So Android's a little different. We handle it via the intent framework, but we use the same scheme. So you'd really declare it within the actual activity itself, and you would handle it as an activity, and you'd write your own intent filter. And in this intent filter, you handle the scheme, and then of course, not only do you handle that scheme, but you also go in and see how I declare the Android scheme there as ArcGIS Navigator. So this is actually what we have in the Navigator application. But you'd actually have an activity that handles the parsing of arguments within that scheme. What this allows us to do, again, is use one URL scheme for multiple platforms, which is a nice feature. And then that's on the on-intent handler. This is where we actually do the parsing and do the actions that are initiated by a URL scheme that's handled. So now it's a demo theater, so I think we'll do mostly demos for the rest of the presentation. So we'll do a demo in Workforce, Explorer, Navigator, Collector, and follow up with Survey 1, 2, 3. But let me jump over to 3, if we could. Perfect. All right, so the first thing I want to show is Workforce. So let me open up Workforce here. Oh no, actually, can we jump back to 5? Because I'm not actually doing a demo of Workforce. I'm doing a slide for Workforce. So I don't know how well that's coming through for folks in the back, but the way you might want to integrate with Workforce is to actually jump into and add your app's URL scheme within the assignment integration JSON block. This is within the actual project JSON itself. So here I've gone in and I've added my custom app to it. So I've gone in and edited that JSON, and I've added my actual scheme, and I can actually add arguments to that as well. Now when you do that, what happens is when you tap on the action sheet icon in the accessory of the assignment itself, let's see if my cursor is showing up here. So this little guy here, when I tap on that, well normally you get Navigator, right? You get, depending on how your project's configured, but default you get Navigator, and if you configured Survey 1, 2, 3, it shows up in that list. Collector also shows up, but you see launch my app. So that is the actual prompt argument. So you can kind of configure it to say whatever the call to action you want it to show in Workforce, and then it'll actually launch that URL template, that my URL scheme. So if you have your own app, it's sitting on the device, you can actually tell Navigator to kick out to your app from the device, or sorry, tell Workforce to kick out to your app from the device. So this is a nice way of you as a developer to integrate with Navigator and have Navigator call a custom third-party application. So that's Workforce. Now we'll actually go over to 3, and I'll show some other apps. All right, so the first thing I want to show is just Explorer working with URL schemes. So, it's just a URL, so what a lot of our customers are doing is actually, well, I'm going to jump out to Chrome. Yeah, that'll work. Sorry. I'm going to use Safari for this one. So what a lot of our customers are doing is actually hosting a web application and just putting a bunch of URL schemes on that web application. So just a simple website, and they might have processes that are building up these URL schemes and just putting this into the HTML. And then their field workers might go onto that website and just tap on any one of these, and it actually launches the app. So here I could tap on the first one, which actually opens Explorer, but I'm referencing an item ID of a mobile map package. So the first thing it'll do is start downloading that mobile map package because I don't already have it on my device. Then once it finishes downloading, I can start working with that mobile map package. And where we're seeing it being used is a really quick way to get people up and running with the app and actually get the content seeded on the application. So you don't have to worry about telling people what to search on and what map to open. It's a really easy way of jump-starting that process. This also works for, let me jump out to the other one. This actually works for web maps as well. So if you don't have a mobile map package and you want to start that download experience but have a connected experience, well, you can go and open Explorer and it opens a web map via ID. So that's a quick and easy way to jump into Explorer directly by referencing the web map as an argument in the Explorer URL scheme. So that's Explorer. Let me do a quick demo on, let's see what other apps I got going on here. Let me do a quick demo on the Navigator URL scheme. So I'll jump back to Safari. And you see I also have a link to the Navigator URL scheme. And this is actually using that URL I had in the previous slide, that really long URL. But when I tap on this is going to open up Navigator. And it's going to pass Navigator a whole bunch of different stops. At least it should. So when it passes Navigator those stops, it also tells Navigator to find a route on those stops. And from there, I can actually just start automatically navigating. And where we're seeing this being used quite a bit is actually being used by in concert with like geoprocessing tools and ArcGIS Pro, where you'd build up this complex route every day and then send these URLs out to your field office, your field workers. They would hit the web app and then just click on the URL that pertains to them. Actually, what another group of our users are doing is actually emailing a PDF out to their users, and that PDF has URLs embedded within it. So I'll show that really quick. Let's see here. So here I've emailed a PDF to myself. If I open that PDF up, I've actually taken pictures of some QR codes. But if I was to just tap on a link within that PDF, well, it actually goes out and rapid exits. Let's open that again. Let's jump into a PDF one more time. If I tap on that daily route, it'll go in and generate that route one more time. So you could either host a web application, or you can just embed those URLs within a PDF, and then the field workers might go in and open that PDF, tap on a link. You can also scan a QR code, which I'll show in a little bit. So that's the URL scheme on Explorer. I showed a quick way to integrate your app within Workforce. So with an assignment, they can jump out to your custom app directly from an assignment. And then I followed up by showing Navigator and ways to integrate the URL scheme with Navigator via a web application and also via PDF. I'll hand it back over to James so he can show some Survey 123 demos.
Sure. What I'm going to show is actually the beginning of using, say, Collector or Explorer as a map to orient your field crews, and then take an inspection form with Survey 123. So here you've got a map, just an ArcGIS Online web map. In this case, this is bike share stations. If you've been to DC, you may have seen these red bikes. You can rent them by the half hour, essentially. It's a it's a big transit system, and of course, bikes break down and docks break down. So if we click here, you can see that I've customized a pop-up to present the number of docks at the place, and also to have a link to fill out the repair report. If I click the link, you can see that I'm being prompted to open up Survey 123. And apparently, I'm having some issues downloading. Let me sign out. There we go. And so we've transmitted the URL in Survey 123 to open up a particular form. and also to fill it in with a particular value. You can see that we've got here the 3150-507 at First in Washington Hospital Center. It matches that. So we've passed the value there. We save this web map. We can then use it, as I said, in Collector or Explorer as basically a browsing map. You mind if I actually do switch? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's...
You want to jump on this?
Yeah. So just to show this again, in here.
3.
Sorry. I go over here in Explorer. Sorry, actually showing that out. So again, this is that exact same map, right? Because we've saved the web map properties and Explorer and Collector read the web map, it brings up the same pop-up information that I presented. And again, oh, sorry, I was at a settings page. There it goes. And then again, loads in the form for that. So everything you do, just the same story with Collector. When we set up the web map, we set up how it looks on the website, and then how it looks on the mobile device. And just to show you, in terms of setting this up, we go here to.
Can I grab it? Or,
yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry.
No worries.
If we go here to the bike share stations, go to the pop-up configuration. As I said, I've set this to a custom attribute display. And so if I go to the configure, and let's just go switch to the code view, you can see that we're using here the URL to, as we've seen, open up the Survey123 application with a particular form, and then populate a particular field based on the field name of the feature. So we're passing in the value from the feature via the pop-up link into the survey. Same with the latitude of longitude. Again, passing those values from the table via the URL into the survey. When you take a look at that, sorry. Yeah. When you take a look at that here, you can see that it, as I said, pops in the actual values we were using. Same mechanism for authoring any sort of web map pop-up. Essentially, we're just applying it to a URL, which is probably a little bit novel.
Okay. Very cool. I'm a little disappointed, James. You weren't using the Explorer beta. We got to get you on the beta program, which is a very brutal segue
yes.
into telling you guys we're in beta right now. We'd love to have you participate in Explorer beta. So come see me after the session, and I might just get you a free beer if you participate in the beta. All right, let's kick over to 3.
Oh, sorry.
I want to do a quick demo. So I have this QR code reader app, and I mentioned that some of our users are embedding those URLs in QR codes. And I've printed out a couple, and if I scan the Collector QR code, you see it brought up the Collector URL scheme with just an item ID that references a web map. So this is something that some of our customers are actually doing right now. It's a quick and easy way to get people up and running in Collector with the right web map open. So you see when I tapped on that URL scheme, it opened Collector, it opened the right web map, and from there I can start collecting. So that's Collector using URL scheme via a QR code. And I guess let's switch over to the slides, number 5.
Yeah.
All right. So now we'll do like a deep dive for each URL scheme and what properties are actually supported. So for
We'll get to that.
Good question. Can you just write a real quick slide to show where that is, and then slide it in?
I thought you had it at the end.
I'm joking with you. Yeah, we'll get to that. So a good question. The question was where are these documented, and we have GitHub repos for all the arguments. We have code samples in there. Depending on the app, there's different languages, but I know for Navigator we have Python, we have Swift. What else do we got, Joel?
Java, yeah.
Yeah, some Java, like Android example, showing that intent, how you write your own intent handler for Navigator, but there's GitHub repos that are available to you.
Yeah.
Right, yep, it's all in there. It's in the README of the repo, so you can see all the parameters, and then there's some examples of how to use each parameter, how to set them, some gotchas and stuff like that. So just to run through these really quick, Navigator supports the start argument, which is really an optional parameter to pass in a start location. If you don't pass that in, it'll just use your current location, like I showed in the examples that I was demoing. It has a stop parameter, which you can pass in one or many stops to route with a multi-route stop. It has a stop name, so optionally you can name each stop, and that's the name that'll show up in the Navigator UX. A callback parameter. I didn't really touch on this too much. I didn't demo it, but it's a really interesting parameter. Basically, you could pass in the callback and a callback prompt for an app that actually calls that URL scheme, and after you're done navigating, Navigator will actually call that URL scheme back. So what it'll do is say, hey, do you want to return to callback prompt? And then if you say yes or tap on that, it'll actually execute that URL scheme that's in the callback argument. Now this is an optional set of arguments, but what some of our users are doing and what we're actually doing, like in an app like Workforce, when you call out to Navigator, after you're done navigating, it'll say, hey, do you want to return back to Workforce? Which is chances are that what the user wants to do after they're done navigating. So we make use of the callback prompt. But we're also seeing this argument used by you guys, by third-party developers that want to call into our apps but don't want to get lost in Esri land. They want to come back into your app. So the callback parameter is a pretty interesting set of arguments for that. Lastly, there's the optimize parameter, which is just a Boolean telling whether you want the ordering of stops to be optimized on the device. And then the last thing is passing in a travel mode. So optionally, you could say, navigate using this particular travel mode if you have those authored into the navigation map itself. And again, there's a link to our GitHub repository. It's just on the Esri org, which is where all our public repos are, and it's just Navigator-integration. The Explorer URL scheme, I showed the item ID. So here you could pass an item ID of a web map or a mobile map package. If you pass in a mobile map package and it's not already on the device, we'll automatically start downloading it for you and then prompt you once downloaded if you want to jump over to that map. There's a center parameter to center, so you can center the map, and also a scale, so you can get the right center and scale based on what you want in the map. Finally, there's a rotation parameter, and again, we support the callback and callback prompts arguments. There's a link to the GitHub repo, same kind of naming convention. Collector URL scheme, item ID, showed that, passing in a web map item ID, and then again, the center parameter. There's a link to the collector integration. I'll switch when you guys are done taking photos. You guys all good? All right. And then lastly, the Survey 123. You want to talk to this one?
Sure, yeah. So Survey 123, fundamentally we support the item ID, which is the form ID, not the feature service, but the form. The field, colon, and then a field name will populate a particular question. So if your question is, for example, station ID, it would be field colon station ID equals the value. And then center is the location of your geopoint question, your point on the map. Now, you will note that we don't have a GitHub repo listed here. Instead, we actually have our documentation inside the main documentation of Survey 123. So this is a Survey 123 help. The topic is integrate with other apps. And we provide you a guided tour in terms of getting through that.
You guys have a really good blog post.
Yes.
Yeah, do we reference that in the slides? Do we get that in there?
I actually favored this, but in the Survey 123 group, and we can put it in the amended slides.
Okay, yeah.
We began that help topic with this blog post
that's
from
good.
this summer.
It's great. It's really concise and gets you up and running really quick if you want to integrate with Survey 123.
The other thing I will mention that we don't have the callback parameter, but both on iOS, you'll normally see a back to in the top left of the screen of the application that launched Survey 123 or another application. In Android, I believe it's just the back button to get back to the previous app. So we don't have callback yet, but there are ways to get back to the returning app.
Cool. Very cool. So as you see, it's really an ecosystem that we're trying to develop of our apps talking to one another and promote kind of multi-app workflows, whether it be like Workforce talking to Collector, or Navigator talking to Collector, or Explorer talking to Navigator or other navigation apps, or Workforce talking to Survey 123. But you guys have a role to play in this as well, right? So we're trying to find points where you guys can integrate your apps into ours, and then we could call back into your apps, whether it be tweaking the project JSON in a workforce project, or actually, excuse me, tweaking the project JSON in a workforce project, or actually just passing using the Explorer or another URL scheme and just passing your callback, your URL scheme in the callback argument, and we'll call back into you. So we're trying to find ways to work together with your apps in a larger ecosystem to make both our customers and your customers really successful. So some resources, and we're happy to take questions after this, but I put 2 links to case studies we have in there, and these are both Navigator case studies, but they're both PDFs, talk about different ways that Navigator users are using the URL scheme. So Atlantic County, they're actually following that PDF workflow that I kind of demoed. So they build up PDFs and send those to each individual field worker every day with their routes for the day. They open their email, tap on it, and it kind of talks about how Atlantic County worked with that. Pima is also doing the web app approach, where they're hosting up a web app and links for each actual assessor, and they tap on that link and it launches Navigator with their routes for the day. Links to all the different repos. We tried to follow a consistent naming convention with that, and then the help topic, a link to the help topic that explains the Survey 123 integrations. So I think that's it. I'm happy to take questions. We're running a little over time, but I don't think there's anyone that has to be in here. So we have a question there. The question is, what about Workforce? Does it have a scheme? It does have a scheme, but as far as the arguments that Workforce can support at this moment, Craig, I don't think you guys support any arguments, right? You can just launch it. But Craig is the man to talk to if you want to push the team on supporting a little bit more arguments in the URL scheme. I know they have a really progressive team that's moving really quick. So if you have requirements for that, definitely let Craig know. He's at the back of the room. I've been picking on him all session. Other questions? Yeah. It's a good question. The question was, any plans for extending the collector URL scheme to support pre-population of attributes and features? Yeah, the team has been prototyping that, and they're thinking about supporting that in a future release. We don't really have a timeline on it yet, but it'd be good to get your specific requirements. And also, if you could swing by the showcase area later in the week, I could pull in some collector folks. I don't work on collector directly, but the team would love to hear kind of what your specific workflows are, because this has been kind of a hot topic of discussion for us, like how far do we go with it? But we're definitely doing some thinking on it. Yeah. Must be a couple more questions. I know it's late, but. Nothing? Not even like one of those yawn fake questions? No? All right, well, thanks very much for showing up late in the afternoon, and we'll be around taking questions after if you want to come up. Thank you very much.